Hey, what's up guys? My name is Jedith, and this video is going to be about momentum. I've made a lot of videos on momentum in the past, but this is one that I feel like is going to be really helpful for everyone who's struggling to use momentum now in Dragonflight. We're kind of forced into playing this build and using this talent. In most cases, there are some situations where you can get away with not using momentum, but you are going to be losing DPS. So it's a matter of convenience versus damage. In most cases, you're going to want to run momentum. I have a few tips and tricks that I'm going to share with you today that hopefully will just make it a little bit easier for you to manage using this talent. So the first one we're going to talk about is strafing and fell rushing sideways. So when people first start using momentum and they realize they have to use their fell rush, their first kind of way that they internalize it is that they have to always fell rush forward. Right? You're fighting a boss here. Your only option is to fell rush forward. Then you have to turn around, and it's big inconvenience. You end up losing a couple auto attacks, probably a GCD in there too. It's not the best way to do it. So what you can do is, on your keyboard, when you use WASD to move, by default, A and D are going to be keys that just like turn your character. I don't have it bound right now, so I can't do it, but it just turns the way your character's facing. What you want to do is rebind A and D to be strafe. So when I press A, my character fully moves to the left. When I press D, my character fully moves to the right. What this allows is for you to hold down A and then fell rush, and you'll fell rush sideways. So if you can aim it properly, you'll be able to go into the tree just like that, and you'll stay in melee range. And this is useful in a lot of situations. You know, you might be trying to dodge a swirly on the ground or whatever it may be, a frontal from a boss, anything like that. It's just a little easier for you to go sideways than always having to readjust the direction that your character's facing and then go forward, because you might have to turn around, you might have to like reposition your character in a larger way than you would have otherwise if you could just like fell rush into this tree, for example. So that is tip number one. The second one is an issue that I hear a lot of people complain about, which I think does happen for a few reasons, but in a lot of cases, it's because of this. So a lot of people say that they find that there is a delay on their fell rush. This can be due to latency, but in some cases, it's just because there's a misunderstanding on how the GCD for fell rush works. So what we're going to focus on here is my bar down at the bottom. So anytime that I use an ability, it's going to incur the GCD. And you can tell the GCD is rolling when you see the kind of like clock swipe on my abilities. Right, you can see it swipe, and when it gets back to 12 o'clock, then the ability is ready to be used. When you're using fell rush, when you use it after a different ability, you do end up waiting the full GCD, right? So say, for example, I use Immolation Aura. I can't use fell rush until the GCD is fully complete. But what does happen sometimes is that there's a thing called spell queue. And spell queue is basically just a window before the end of the GCD that you can press a button to sort of queue up another ability to be pressed. And that ability will get used at the end of the GCD if you triggered it within that spell queue window. So what happens is people will use an ability, for example, Immolation Aura, and by the end of it, they press it at a certain time where it feels like because they pressed the button, they should be shooting forward, but they're not. And it doesn't happen until like a couple milliseconds after they press the button, and that's due to spell queue. The other thing you have to keep in mind is that there's a difference between the GCDs that are incurred by different abilities. Most abilities here on my bars incur the regular GCD. Right, you can see the clock swipe is happening all the same amounts of time for each ability, but for fell rush, it's much smaller. For fell rush, it's technically 0.25, but due to like server latency and whatnot, it ends up being like 0.39. So it's in between like a quarter and half of a GCD. With that in mind, you'll notice that when you press fell rush and then try to press another ability immediately after that, the space in between is a lot smaller than if you're trying to press another ability first and then fell rush. Again, keep your eyes on my bars down here. We're going to be looking at fell rush, and then we'll do I don't know, Immolation Aura. So I'm going to Fel Rush and Immolation Aura immediately, and you'll see that they happen in a shorter amount of time than it would be the other way around, if that makes sense. Okay, so here we go. Right, I was able to cast Immolation Aura much quicker than if I will do Essence Break and then Fel Rush, right? So I Essence Break, and then I can't Fel Rush until the GCD is ready. So I think that's where people get confused and they have the complaint that their Fel Rush is delayed. It all has to do with the GCD and just server queue. Once you know that, you can kind of play around it, use it to your advantage to have Fel Rush go off when you want it to. Okay, tip number 3 is that you don't always have to Vengeful Retreat behind you, and you don't always have to Fel Rush forwards. So I think for this segment, I'm going to put up a clip in the video of me doing the first boss in Vortex Pinnacle, where there's a lot of swirlies all over the place. There's a lot of things you have to dodge, and it's pretty much impossible. If I wanted to just Fel Rush forwards or VR backwards, it would be impossible. I would die. So what you have to do is you have to be fully aware of your surroundings and look for gaps. You want to look for openings. There might be something diagonally. So we'll switch back to me here on the target dummy. Let's say I'm fighting this dummy here. There's no safe spot, but I know I can go kind of up here diagonally. So instead of Fel Rushing forwards, I would go this way. And then if I wanted to get back, I could VR back this way, and I'm right where I started. So instead of just always like thinking your only option is to only ever go forwards, you can pre-position yourself in spots where you're not putting yourself at risk. And that just comes down to situational awareness. And I think that's the most important thing when it comes to playing Momentum or any build that is using either Vengeful Retreat or Fel Rush is situational awareness. You have to be looking around you at all times and sort of like keeping track in your brain about what's happening or what might be happening behind you. I've been saying this for a while now. It is an extra layer of sort of awareness and complexity to the class that we play that other classes don't need to worry about, but it is kind of what gives us that sort of edge for better or for worse. So that is tip number 3. The next tip is that Fel Rush gives you 5 seconds of momentum. So if you're ever in a situation where you have a momentum buff running, you don't want to Fel Rush again if your momentum buff is higher than 5 seconds, because then you're going to cap out on your momentum buff and you're wasting some of that extra momentum that you're getting. So one thing to keep in mind though is that because there is, you know, a cast animation for Fel Rush, when you Fel Rush, it's going to look like, if you watch here above my my weak aura package here, it's going to look like it starts at 4 seconds. And that's because there is a delay between casting the ability and the ability ending. So if I Fel Rush, you're going to see 4 seconds when it should be 5. Just something to keep in mind when you're doing a boss or you're in Mythic Plus or whatever. You want to do your very best to not overcap on your momentum buff, and that is done by, you know, not using your Fel Rush above 5 seconds on your momentum buff. So the final tip is how to use your camera. So the most important thing when you're learning how to VR and how to Fel Rush effectively on a boss fight is learning how to go over the boss's hitbox so you stay in melee range, as opposed to just going straight through and having to turn around. So what you don't want to happen is you don't want to be fighting this, say this target dummy is the boss, you have to go through, and you have to turn around. You know, it's a waste. Like I said at the start of the video, you're losing some auto attacks, you're losing a GCD potentially, having to turn around like that. What you want to do is, you're going to be fighting, whatever, and then you're going to turn around and VR through. And that way you're still facing the boss, you're still going to be able to hit it, not losing any uptime. But that's not a simple movement. It's definitely not a simple movement if you're new to the class, if you're new to the spec, especially if you're not using a mouse. I can't imagine doing that on like a trackpad for people that play on laptops. I mean, people do it, but I don't know how they do it. So what I would do, if you need to practice that, you could use anything in your environment. Find this path here, for example, right? This path on the ground, this brown path. What I would do is I would stand here and I would press VR and practice turning my camera around, right? Go this way and practice turning your camera around so you're facing the way you want to end up. That's going to become really useful to you in just your regular momentum gameplay, because if you don't do that, you're going to spend a lot of extra time and wasted time having to turn your camera afterwards. So you want to be able to do it fluidly inside of your VR movement. So what you don't want it to look like is this, right? Because you're wasting GCDs, you're wasting just auto attacks. And auto attacks are super important for Havoc because we use Demon Blades. So our auto attacks are giving us resources, and it's just not a good thing to do. So what I would do, like I said, find something in your environment that you can use as sort of a boundary or whatever. Just practice VRing and turning your camera. Same with fell rushing, right? Learn how to swing your camera around after you fell rush, or like when you're in the middle of your fell rush. And you'll have a much better time trying to use momentum. So those are my 5 tips. If you guys found this useful, make sure you give the video a like, make sure you sub to the YouTube channel, and make sure you check out the merch down below. We have some really cool t-shirts. We have an Enjoy Momentum t-shirt. So if you enjoy momentum, or even if you don't enjoy momentum, if you hate momentum, you can get one of these shirts and wear it ironically. How about that? Links are in the description, also in the merch shelf below this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace.